My 7th grade history teacher was absolutely sure that Julius Caesar had been the first president of the United States. When a student politely corrected him, saying it was George Washington, the teacher's face turned red. He accused the student of mocking authority and sent him to the principal's office. Then he launched into a passionate lecture about how Roman numerals on the dollar bill proved his theory. He was dead serious, waving a crumpled dollar like sacred evidence. The class sat in stunned silence, realizing this man truly believed a Roman emperor ruled America before 1776. We never mentioned Caesar again in his class. In college physics, our professor decided to demonstrate inertia by pulling a tablecloth out from under a full dining setup. He dramatically rolled up his sleeves, grabbed the cloth, and shouted, "Science in action," before yanking with superhero strength. Plates, glasses, and silverware launched into the air and shattered like fireworks. He froze, surveying the disaster, then calmly said, "That, class, is what happens when friction wins." Without missing a beat, he dismissed everyone early. No one ever mentioned the experiment again. The janitor spent hours sweeping up scientific evidence from the floor. My high school biology teacher insisted that humans and dinosaurs had coexisted. Her proof? She'd seen it in the Flintstones. She called it a historical recreation, and said scientists were lying about extinction timelines. When a student brought in a textbook showing the actual prehistoric eras, she accused him of trusting propaganda. She even claimed that cavemen used brontosauruses as transportation because you can't draw something that didn't exist. The class didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Every test she gave had questions like, which dinosaur did early humans ride to work? In my senior literature class, our professor failed every student's final project. His explanation was that no one had submitted the assignment. When we showed him the syllabus, and the dozens of essays he'd already received, he blinked and said, "Oh, right. I forgot I assigned that." Then shrugged and said, "Too late to grade now. You should have reminded me." Despite our protests, he refused to change the marks. The entire class had to retake the course next semester, all because of his forgetfulness. He later claimed it was a lesson in responsibility. We once had a substitute teacher in chemistry who clearly had no idea what she was doing. When a student asked about ionic bonds, she froze and said, "Open your books to any page. Start copying everything you see. The answers are in the words, and if you write the words, the knowledge becomes yours." For an hour, the classroom was dead silent except for scribbling pens. She wandered around nodding approvingly, like she was guiding an ancient ritual. By the end, we had filled pages with random text and learned absolutely nothing except that panic makes teachers creative. Our geography teacher once pointed to Africa on a map and asked, "Who knows the capital of this country?" A confused student said, "Africa is a continent." The teacher sighed and replied, "That's a common myth. The capital is Egypt." Someone tried to correct him, saying Cairo was Egypt's capital, not Africa's. The teacher rolled his eyes and explained, "Egypt represents Africa as a whole." He proudly wrote "Capital of Africa equals Egypt" on the board. We stopped correcting him after that, just to get through the lesson without losing our minds. A hard-working art student spent weeks sculpting their final project. When it came time to present, the sculpture was gone. The teacher claimed she'd never seen it. Later, the student spotted it sticking out of the school dumpster, half broken. The teacher had thrown it away, thinking it was a pile of leftover clay. When confronted, she denied everything and then gave the student a 0 for not submitting the project correctly. The poor student even brought photos as proof, but the teacher just shrugged and said, "Next time, label your garbage." Our computer science teacher didn't actually know how to use computers. For our HTML unit, he made us write code by hand in our notebooks. When we asked when we'd get to test it, he said, "Computers are for the final." On exam day, he had us type our handwritten code into Microsoft Word, print it, and turn it in. He said he'd run it later. To this day, we're convinced he just skimmed the papers and made up grades. Ironically, his favorite saying was, "Technology is the future." A notoriously eccentric professor graded essays by throwing them down a staircase. "It's fair," he explained. "The universe decides. Papers that landed near the top got A's, the ones in the middle earned B's and C's, and the unlucky few that tumbled to the bottom failed." On the day he demonstrated his method, he gathered our essays in a pile, tossed them dramatically, and announced our fates as they landed. He claimed it eliminated bias. Most of us didn't agree, but at least gravity was consistent. Our health teacher once told us that the best cure for a cold was smoking a cigarette. He said the smoke would dry out your lungs and kill the germs. He also insisted that soda was healthier than juice because carbonation scrubs your insides clean. This man taught in an accredited school, by the way. When someone asked if that advice was safe, he replied, "Doctors overcomplicate everything. Trust nature and nicotine." We learned more about bad advice that day than about actual health. My high school Spanish teacher didn't actually speak Spanish. Every lesson came straight from Google Translate. When a native-speaking student asked her a simple question, she froze, typed it into her phone, then read the translation out loud in the most robotic accent imaginable. The class just stared. She would type her answers in English, translate them back, and proudly say them as if fluent. Once, the translation glitched, and she accidentally told the class, "Your homework is to eat my pencil." No one corrected her. She thought we were laughing because we loved the language. In a creative writing class, a student wrote a brilliant 20-page story. Everyone loved it, except the professor. When he returned the paper, a big red F covered the front page. His only comment: "I don't like stories where the main character's name is Kevin." The student's name wasn't Kevin, but the character's was. When asked why that mattered, the professor just said, "Kevin is a weak literary name." That was his entire justification. It became legendary at our school, the Kevin curse. Future students avoided naming any character Kevin ever again. Our PE teacher had discovered the perfect combination of laziness and authority: a golf cart. During track and field week, he'd park in the shade, megaphone in one hand, bag of chips in the other. "Run faster," he'd yell between bites. If someone lagged behind, he'd roll up behind them and honk the horn like a tiny chase car. Motivation, he'd call it. Once, he accidentally ran over a water bottle and blamed the student for obstructing the field. We didn't do much athletic training, but we learned plenty about efficiency in snacks. Our philosophy professor gave a single question on the final: why? He told us our grade would depend on the depth of thought and courage of response. I wrote a 10-page essay exploring existentialism, morality, and absurdity. I got a C. Another student wrote just one word: because. He handed it in after 5 minutes and got an A. When we asked how that made sense, the professor said, he understood the question. I realized philosophy might not be about answers after all. Our old-fashioned English teacher despised technology. When the school installed a brand new smartboard in her classroom, she ignored its digital features completely and used it like a regular whiteboard. The problem? She used permanent markers. Her grammar notes and Shakespeare quotes became permanent fixtures. The janitorial crew spent 3 days trying to scrub it clean. She blamed the cheap digital screen instead of the markers. The smartboard never recovered, and she went back to chalk. She called it teaching with integrity. My economics professor once spent an entire lecture pitching us a pyramid scheme. He drew diagrams showing how we could all get rich together by selling energized wellness water. He claimed it was real-world economics, not that textbook nonsense. A few students almost signed up before someone told the dean. He was fired a week later. The best part? He ended the presentation with, "If you understand compound interest, you'll understand this opportunity." He might have been right, for the wrong reasons. Instead of teaching us about the Civil War, our history teacher spent 6 weeks proving that the moon landing was fake. He showed grainy YouTube documentaries and paused them every minute to say, "Look. No stars in the background." When we were supposed to be learning about Abraham Lincoln, we were instead analyzing suspicious shadows. He made us write essays titled "Why the Moon Landing Couldn't Have Happened." By the end, we all knew nothing about US history, but a lot about conspiracy theories. During my first highway driving lesson, I looked over to ask my instructor a question, and he was fast asleep. Completely knocked out, head against the window, snoring softly. I was terrified. I'd been driving for only 2 weeks and had to navigate traffic alone while my instructor dreamed peacefully beside me. After 20 agonizing minutes, I managed to pull over and wake him up. He blinked and said, "You did fine. See? You're independent now." I didn't find it funny. My hands were shaking for hours. My choir teacher was completely tone deaf. She couldn't match a single note on the piano, yet corrected everyone else. She gave the strangest feedback imaginable: sopranos, "You sound too pointy," or tenors, "Make your voices more purple." When we actually hit the right notes, she'd frown and say it was wrong. The result was a horrifying wall of sound that made the janitor wear earplugs during rehearsals. Still, she proudly told the principal we were an experimental choir. I think she meant chaotic. My philosophy professor banned all questions during lectures because he said they interrupted his flow of genius. If you had a question, you had to write it on a slip of paper and hand it to him at the end of class. He'd collect them, place them in a briefcase, and say, "I will meditate on these." We never got a single answer the entire semester. When someone asked after class if he'd ever respond, he said, "Understanding is your own responsibility." He was the most mysterious man alive, and the least helpful. One day, our chemistry teacher decided to impress us with a dramatic combustion experiment. He mixed 2 chemicals that absolutely should not have been combined. The result was an enormous cloud of green smoke that smelled like rotten eggs and panic. The fire alarm blared, students coughed, and the entire school evacuated. When the principal asked what happened, the teacher blamed it on a student coughing too close to the beaker. Everyone knew it was his fault, but he still wrote "successful demonstration" in his lab notes. We never did another experiment again, just worksheets. Our literature professor had a truly bizarre interpretation of Moby Dick. According to him, the story wasn't about obsession or a whale. It was a metaphor for the author's disappointment with 19th century cheese quality. When students tried to argue, he dismissed them for being too literal. He graded any essay mentioning a whale with an automatic F during one class. Someone asked, "What about the giant white whale in every chapter?" He sighed and said, "That's dairy symbolism." It was the most confusing Ahab journey ever told. My freshman biology teacher told us that plants could feel pain and scream when cut. He said their cries were just at a frequency humans couldn't hear. He cited a long-debunked 1970s experiment as proof. One girl burst into tears after mentioning she'd mowed her lawn over the weekend. The teacher dramatically told her she'd committed a massacre of innocents. He even asked us to apologize to our salads at lunch the next day. It was both hilarious and horrifying. During algebra class, our teacher got stuck solving a problem on the board. He kept getting the wrong answer again and again. After 15 minutes of frustration, he slammed the chalk down and shouted, "The textbook is full of errors." Then he blamed the publishers for sabotaging the learning process. A student timidly walked up and solved it correctly in under a minute. The teacher glared and gave him detention for showing off. From that day on, no one dared to correct him again. In social studies, one student yawned during a dull lecture. The teacher stopped mid-sentence and demanded his name. The next day, the student got detention for audible display of boredom. When he tried to explain he was just tired, the teacher said, "Your tiredness is disrespectful to the educational process." He spent an hour after school, reflecting on his attitude. From then on, everyone learned to yawn silently, or not at all.